Now, if you lived in the ancient world and you went from chapter 23, excuse me, the death of Jesus, to chapter 24, the resurrection of Jesus, the question is, would you be surprised? In other words, is it not the case that many ancient cultures had dying and rising God myths? Isn't it the case that Christianity could be seen as nothing more than an alternative to the Mithraic cult and the slaughtering of the bull and the blood? Is it not possible that an ancient person might hear a story like this and just simply say, oh, it's another dying and rising God myth? The answer is no. The ancients do not think like us moderns. That's our question, because we're able to actually go back and study these ancient cultures and their mythologies, but they were living them. So when we come to this text, we have to ask, what would somebody in the ancient world say? What is it that is going to change everything? What's the paradigm shift here? Does it have to do with history and the historical? And if it does, what's the relationship between the events in this chapter and the events that just went on before? Excuse me. Second, when we come to the resurrection narrative, we are going to notice an extraordinary variety in these narratives in particular. The passion narratives, as we've seen, just kind of briefly, we've seen that the Mark and Matthew just kind of tend to follow. Matthew follows Mark, I should say, pretty just straight down the line, and Luke does as well with the insertions of his special material. And the fourth gospel, pretty similar model. But when it comes to the resurrection narratives, they can't even agree, for example, on how many figures are at the tomb. So, for example, if you put Mark first, it says, on entering the tomb, they saw a young man. And if you go to Matthew, it says, behold, an angel of the Lord descended. His appearance was white as lightning. If you go to Luke, you've got two men who stood by in dazzling apparel. And in the Gospel of John, you have, as I recall, the two angelic beings. But at any rate, you can't even agree on the witnesses. Now, when it comes to the fact that it is just the women, all four Gospels are united in that. There is no doubt as to the women being there. And to underscore this, each Gospel writer in particular mentions Mary Magdalene. Mary Magdalene features prominently in the resurrection narrative. Others have observed that part of the importance of this is that it gives now authority, eyewitness authority to women, not just men. Okay? And as we'll see in a moment, the women come with this message and the men just have a hard time believing it. So whether you go with Mark and Matthew's after the Sabbath, or Luke and John's now on the first day of the week at dawn, they went to the tomb while it was still dark. Now we're going to follow Luke's account here. Taking the spices which they had prepared, and they found the stone rolled away from the tomb. But when they went in, they did not find the body. while they were perplexed about this, behold, there's that wonderful Greek term, idou, behold. It's whenever you see that in a Greek text, it means pay attention. So behold, two men stood by them in dazzling apparel. And as they were frightened and bowed their faces to the ground, the men said, "Why do you seek the living among the dead?" Now, this is going to be different than the Mark and Matthean accounts. And there is, of course, nothing recorded in the Gospel of John about this particular encounter. But in the Mark and in Matthew version, it's, "Do not be amazed. You seek Jesus of Nazareth, who was crucified. He is risen. He is not here. See the place where they laid him." So the angel is now in Mark, or the figure in Mark is delivering this as a message, as a kerygma, as a proclamation, where Luke has the women responding to these now dazzling white figures, and he asks the question, "Why do you seek the living among the dead?" Remember how he told you. Now, we've seen this use of remembrance in Luke many, many times. Many times. Remember. There's the use of the cock crowing. Peter remembers. There's a number of times in the gospel text where the editor has put in, "and they remembered this saying." And of course, later on, the text says, "Remember how he told you while he was still in Galilee." And this, again, this is not in Mark or Matthew, "that the Son of Man must be delivered into the hands of sinful men and be crucified, and on the third day rise." Now we have the hermeneutic tie-in, my friends, going back into the travel journey narrative, where we have the multiple occasions in the Gospels. It's three times Jesus does this passion prediction. This angel is tying their memory back to those occasions where Jesus pointed out this had to happen. And the text says, "And they remembered his words. And returning from the tomb, they told all this to the 11 and all the rest." Mark's ending of the resurrection narrative is impossible. In verse 8, the text has, "They said nothing to anyone, for they were afraid." Phobon togar. You can't end a sentence in Greek with gar. You certainly don't end a paragraph with it. You don't end a book with it. So whatever came after Mark 16:8, for some reason, we do not possess. And there is an ending to the Gospel of Mark that is found in the later manuscripts, makes its way into the Textus Receptus of Erasmus, and of course the King James Bible. But I do want to turn your attention to it for just a moment as we examine the number of fascinating things that are in this first two sentences of the longer version of the Markan resurrection text. So this can be found if you have a King James, if you have any Bible, they'll put it in. Mark 16, we're going to look at the first few verses. "Now, when he rose early on the first day of the week," I want you to notice the perspective of the narrative. It's from the perspective of Jesus. When he arose. All the other resurrection narratives are not from the perspective of Jesus. They're from the perspective of those who encountered Jesus. But this longer ending, when he rose early on the first day of the week, he appeared first to Mary Magdalene. Friends, where is that found? It's found in the Gospel of John. The appearance to the Magdalene, from whom he had cast out 7 demons. Where's that found? That's just part of the tradition. She went and told those who'd been with him as they mourned and wept, but when they heard that he was alive and had been seen by her, they would not believe it. After this, he appeared in another form to 2 of them as they were walking in the country. And when they went back and told the rest, they did not believe them. Where's that from? Well, that's from our chapter today, the 2 disciples walking on the road to Emmaus. So whoever the writer of the long ending is, they are now giving us texts from Luke and John. This is not independent tradition. Afterwards, he appeared to the 11 themselves as they sat at the table, and he upbraided them for their unbelief and hardness of heart, because they had not believed those who saw him after he had risen. And then you have kind of like a Great Commission thing that goes on there, that our dear friends in the Appalachian Mountain Range of the United States have turned into a form of Sunday morning Christian worship, otherwise known as snake handling. So it's amazing what people can do to try and, say Jesus told us to go play with snakes and so forth. All right. Luke continues. Now he's going to, up to this point, he said they. He hasn't said who these women were, whereas the other Gospels name them right up front in the narrative. There's this anonymity. Who are the they? Who are the they that are here meeting these 2 figures in the tomb? Luke says it was Mary Magdalene and Joanna and Mary, the mother of James. Mary, the mother of James. This would not be the Zebedee's mother. She would have been known as Mary as the mother of James and John. So who's Mary, the mother of? James. Notice, not Mary, the mother of Jesus, but Mary, the mother of his other brother, now the oldest in the family system, James. So you have Mary Magdalene, Joanna, Mary, Mother Mary, as we could say, and the other women with them. So there are other women. There's a group of women. There's perhaps 4, 5, or 6. We don't know. Evidently, the Magdalene gets there first. I imagine that she did not sleep that night. She's there before the crack of dawn. And when she gets there, she has her encounter. But Peter rose and ran to the tomb. Stooping and looking in, he saw the linen cloths by themselves. And he went home wondering what had happened. The Johannine writer gives us that same Peter going to the tomb, but of course the other disciple beats him in the race and goes in first because that's Johannine priority. For Luke, though, Peter runs and he can't make sense of it. He can't wrap his head around this, okay? Any more than your basic liberal Christian can't wrap their head around the resurrection. And we're going to discuss some of the theological implications that are not necessarily Lucan, but very important to consider when we talk about the resurrection. Now, immediately following, we have the story of the 2 men and Jesus joining in their journey on the road to Emmaus. I have a talk somewhere on this that was greatly inspired by James Allison's take on this particular text. I don't know where that talk is. I went looking for it, but I can't find it. At any rate, that very day, two of them were going to a village named Emmaus. Notice the anonymity, two of them. We don't even, two of them. About 7 miles from Jerusalem, and talking with each other about all these things that had happened. You can imagine here, they're recreating, they're developing memory of what had occurred, what from Palm Sunday to Good Friday, as it were. And now to this weird message that Jesus wasn't in the tomb. I thought I had turned the ringer off on that. I apologize. While they were talking and discussing together, Jesus himself drew near and went with them. But their eyes were kept from recognizing him. This is somehow an important feature in the resurrection narrative episodes. Only Luke records their eyes were kept from recognizing him. But Jesus is a stranger in every resurrection appearance. The Magdalene thinks he's a gardener. The disciples think they're seeing a spirit or a ghost. The two men on the road don't recognize him. This is really, really, really important. There is something about encountering the risen Jesus that was substantively different than encountering the historical Jesus. It is amazing to me that nobody recognizes Jesus in his resurrected form. He has to reveal himself. And the same is true, by the way, of Paul on the road to Damascus. Who are you? He doesn't recognize him. And Jesus said to them, "What is this conversation which you are holding with each other as you walk?" Kind of a leading question. And they stood still. They stopped, boom, looking sad. Then one of them, named Cleopas, we get the name of one of them, answered him, "Are you the only visitor in Jerusalem who does not know the things that have happened there in these days?" Folks, there are close to 1 million people, pilgrimage time in Jerusalem. This crucifixion of Jesus of Nazareth would have been big news. It was out there on the hill in Jerusalem, outside of Jerusalem, outside the gate. This was big news. The Romans were crucifying the prophet from Galilee. And he says to them, "What things?" Because he wants to get their interpretation of the event. And they said to him, "Concerning Jesus of Nazareth, who was a prophet, mighty in deed and word before God and all the people, and how our chief priests and rulers delivered him up to be condemned to death and crucified him." Notice who Luke wants to pin the blame on. Okay, that temple leadership. "But we had hoped that he was the one to redeem Israel." We got to go all the way back into the infancy narratives and the Magnificat and the Benedictus and the prophecy of Simeon about this child. And then we can traverse through the narrative of Jesus as this prophet-like Moses theme. Everybody's perceiving him as a deliverer. They had their hopes set high. How high did they have their hopes set? We know in the Garden of Gethsemane, they were ready to go to holy war. And this is going to be very important by the end of this talk. In Gethsemane, they're ready to go to war. This is very important. We had hoped he was the one to redeem Israel. Yes, and besides all this, it's now the third day since that happened. And some of our women amazed us. They were at the tomb early in the morning. They couldn't find his body, and they came back saying that they had even seen a vision of angels. So Luke's two men, two figures now become angels, who said that he was alive. Some of those who were with us went to the tomb and found it just as the woman had said, but him they did not see. And he said to them, "O foolish men, and slow of heart to believe all that the prophets have spoken." What prophets? What texts are we talking about? Well, we've seen Jesus, as we've gone through the Lucan narrative, use the jubilary text of Isaiah, used texts from Jeremiah, used any number of texts from Deuteronomy, texts from Zechariah, these prophetic texts that refer to his suffering, to his dying, and particularly the Isaianic servant. And he says in verse 26, "Was it not necessary that the Messiah should suffer these things and enter into his glory?" Look at the language. Was it not necessary? The answer is it was necessary. It had to be this way. This is the only way it could be. What is he talking about? Let's carry on. "And beginning with Moses and all the prophets, he interpreted to them in all the scriptures the things concerning himself." And in particular, you have to know that he is referring to those figures in the biblical tradition, like the psalmist of Psalm 22, like Joseph in the well, like Job, perhaps even like Achan, if Jesus was bold enough to demythologize that text on the road that day. But he's turning to this suffering servant figure, this righteous figure who ends up being the victim of the system and the mob. It's important here that the Greek term "he interpreted to them," we derive the word hermeneutics straight from it, dehermeneuein. He interpreted. He gave them a hermeneutic that day. That hermeneutic is a way of reading the texts that are going to influence the early Christian development of who Jesus is. And so we can see that in the Gospels and in Paul and other writings. So they drew near the village to which they were going, and he appeared to be going further. But they constrained him, saying, "Stay with us, for it's toward evening, and the day is now far spent." So he went in to stay with them. When he was at table with them, he took bread and blessed and broke it and gave it to them. I hope the bells are ringing in your head, guys. That's Last Supper language, isn't it? Took, broke, blessed, gave. But it's also language from the feeding of the 5,000 that would basically change his ministry when they wanted to make him king. In that narrative, he took the bread, broke it, he blessed it, and he gave it. We are dealing here with what is apparently a regular ritual routine of Jesus when he just ate. And so he transfers that routine now into the ritual on the last night of his life, but he still follows that ritual in his resurrection life. Took, broke, blessed, gave. Okay. Their eyes were opened. It's at that moment. It's at precisely that moment. Their eyes are open and they recognized him and he vanished just as bang, just like that. Now notice their reaction. Did not our hearts burn within us while he talked to us on the road? While he opened up to us the scriptures? And they rose at that very hour, made that 7-mile trek back to Jerusalem. They found the 11 gathered together and those who were with them, who said, the Lord has risen indeed and has appeared to Simon. So now in the Lucan narrative, we have that singular resurrection appearance to Peter mentioned. Then they told what had happened on the road and how he was known to them in the breaking of the bread. First, there is a resurrection appearance to Peter. Paul mentions it in a list in 1 Corinthians 15 when he says to Peter, to James, and then to all the apostles. Both Peter and James received special appearances. They are not recorded. You can get apocryphal, made-up versions if you want, because one of the first things the early Christian writers did in the 2nd and 3rd centuries was to midrash this stuff out and create all kinds of story behind it. But Peter's is missing in the tradition, and so is James. The one thing that James, that's perhaps historical about the James narrative is James refuses to eat until he sees the risen Christ. And the first thing that Jesus does in that apocryphal narrative, which perhaps has some historicity, is invite James to eat, invites him to a meal. And we've seen how meals and hospitality play a significant role in the Gospel of Luke. So we have these themes coming together. We have Jesus having to interpret himself to these followers. Now we have one last small text to consider, and that's the end of Luke. Then he said to them, this is to the disciples that are gathered together now, these are my words which I spoke to you while I was still with you, that everything written about me in the law of Moses and the prophets and the Psalms must be fulfilled. Then he opened their minds to understand the scriptures. I do not know what that means. I would love for somebody to do that to me. But in the meantime, I just have to settle for working with texts, although I'm sure the Holy Spirit does a lot of work. So that's a little joke. He opened their mind to understand the scriptures and said, thus it is written. Now notice where he points, that the Christ should suffer. First thing he has to do is establish this suffering figure. Okay? So the first thing he has to establish, Messiah has to suffer. Why? Because at the heart of all religion is that solo figure. We know that from mythology. On the third day, rise from the dead. And this is the conclusion, that changing people's thinking and forgiveness of sin should be preached in his name to all nations, not in my name. Notice that. If Jesus is talking, you would have expected in my name, but so little editorial work going on here from Luke. You are witnesses of these things. And that word witnesses now is going to take us all the way back to the prologue of chapter 1, where Luke starts out by saying, I interviewed eyewitnesses. And they believed and worshiped and returned to Jerusalem with great joy and were continually in the temple. Where does the gospel begin? In the temple. Where does Acts open? In the temple. Where does Pentecost happen? In the temple. For Luke, everything is about interpreting this complex thing called Jewish religion, Jewish faith, the Jewish tradition, in terms of what's happened with the temple. It's also the case that something will happen to the followers of Jesus that will indicate that for them, at least, the appearances of Jesus, not just simply to James or Mary Magdalene or to the apostolic group of the 11 or the 12, or even the Apostle Paul, but the appearance to more than 500 brothers and sisters at the same time. 500 of them. That's Pentecost. That's the Pentecost event. The Pentecost event uses the Greek verb hopsthe, which is an aorist form of blepo, and it's in the passive. And it's only used in the resurrection narratives. And he was manifested, he appeared. And Luke uses that verb in the text. But Luke wants to turn the Pentecost event from being a resurrection narrative where Jesus gives the Spirit to just, this divine Spirit comes down upon the church kind of thing. And it's sad, because if you would have had a story about the appearance of Jesus in that narrative, you would have been able to create a much firmer Christological tie to the Spirit. And we would have not had so many crazies doing the things they do with their doctrines of the Holy Spirit. But Luke doesn't have that. So let's deal with the big question. Did the resurrection happen? Was it historical? That is a modern question, as I've said, and that's fine. Not a question the ancients would ask. What would have astonished the ancients is the story of the resurrection and the multiplicity of witnesses that had encountered Jesus. I mean, you think back, you're in Jerusalem, you're just starting out, and that's the big bang to the more than 500 at once. Boom. This is you could say maybe James had a hallucination or a vision. Peter smoked a little too much peyote. Who knows what Mary Magdalene was on, but to more than 500, okay, and that becomes so important that it becomes a piece of the creedal tradition that one finds in 1 Corinthians 15. So this resurrection appearance to more than 500 creates a ton of witnesses. We have an English phrase I won't use, but you have hundreds of people bearing witness to this in these early days, okay? It's the power of that eyewitness testimony that is going to create the possibility for this community now to go out, as Jesus said, and take this message out and evangelize the world. But there's something also very important that you must absolutely consider. On the night he was betrayed, his followers carried swords. In the book of Acts, at the very beginning, before he teaches them for 40 days, or perhaps it's after, their question is, are you going to do the whole deliverance of Israel thing now? Okay. I don't know what he said during those 40 days to them, but at some point, en masse, that community gave up their swords. that community began following that ethical substratum of learning to love their neighbor as themselves and to forgive 70 times 7. That ethical component that runs through all parts of Christendom, including the heretical parts. That's the unity of early Christianity. Dropping the sword had to have come very early and was done unanimously. It couldn't have been done piecemeal. This was something the early Christians would have understood right from the get-go. No more swords. The power of the resurrection and the power of the resurrection narrative is not that it leads me to believe, oh gosh, all these things happen. Jesus really is divine. Jesus really is God. None of that matters. That's just theological belief. What really matters is that in my encounter with him, in terms of the witness of the early community, that I too learned to drop the sword and learn to forgive 70 times 7 and learn to love my neighbor as myself. All very difficult and challenging things, if we're honest. The power of the resurrection narrative, my friends, does not lie in whether or not it is historical. But if you really want to deal with these questions and all the kind of questions really, because by the way, just you need to know this, the concept of what history is and what constitutes history and what constitutes historical studies has radically changed from the late 19th century through even today, where history today that is not done in these politically correct terms and from this Marxist ideology of the underclass, where history, if it's not done that way, then it's not real history. It's just colonization and colonial thinking. Okay, you know, that's where we're at today. We're going to sort this out eventually. But the concept of the category of history is fluid and it's also opaque. And what one scientist is going to take as his credible historical evidence for an event having happened, another scientist might not. Okay? So for us to get ourselves involved in modern philosophical questions is to entirely miss the point of the text, which is to bring us to an encounter with this living Lord. It's to be done in the context of a community that recognizes him in the sacrificial act of the breaking of the bread. Okay? Notice not has nothing to do with the cup, has everything to do with this act that Jesus had that was part of his routine. So if you want to, if you need real encouragement and you want to break your brain, you may read The Resurrection of the Son of God by Tom Wright. I think it's his best book. Okay? It's 800 pages. It's a tome. It's thick. It's deep. But I think I follow Tom in this. I think the category of eyewitness was huge for the early church. But more important to me, the resurrection brought about this change in these followers of Jesus who gave up something in their life that was very important to every single male on the planet, and that's their sword or their knife or whatever, you know, weapon that they would use to defend themselves. This change, this radical change in this community of people to make that move, not confess that Jesus was the Messiah. That would have been natural and puzzling perhaps to the authorities, but you know, Christians are having these theological debates about the Messiah again. The early church were persecuted because they refused to conform to certain norms in their cultures, and one of those norms was that they were pacifists. They would not carry a sword. They wouldn't fight on behalf of the state. They wouldn't fight on behalf of themselves. Like their master, they too would give their lives for their confession of faith. And they would not have given their lives like they, at least like so many of the legends have it, and so many of the even the early second century figures who gave their lives, who would have known those who knew Jesus, second and third generation, had they not had an authentic encounter with the risen Christ. So I would say that for you and I, we might think that having an encounter with Jesus means that, you know, he comes to us and we have this conversation, and, you know, and we know what he looks like. No. Remember, when we encounter Jesus in his resurrected form, when he comes to us, he's going to come to us always with the same question. Why do you hate me? Why do you persecute me? What is it you don't like about me? What have I done to offend you? He's going to come at you with that question, just like he did the Apostle Paul. And he's going to announce peace to you, which he does with the disciples in the upper room. He's going to announce shalom, wholeness, the true eschatological word. And now we're bringing in the fact that the resurrection is a category for the end of time, as it's conceived within that linear Second Temple theological model. Resurrection is at the end of time, and now it's brought into space, time, and history, which means that history and eschatology have touched. And that's precisely why the body of the Jesus of the resurrection narratives can both walk through walls and eat fish. But he brings to them this message from the future, shalom. There's no vengeance here. It's that understanding, I think, that causes the disciples to let go of their swords. The theological awareness that Jesus hadn't come back to punish them for betraying him, for denying him, for fleeing, for all the things that they had done. He came back and he restored them. He showed them that the Father is not about this radical eschatological vengeance. And I think that removal, in that sense, of violence or retribution from the doctrine of God is what gave them confidence to drop the sword in their ethics and learn to really follow Jesus. So I will end that here because it's gone on plenty long, and we may now have our conversation.
Thank you for having gone through the whole Gospel of Luke.
You're welcome. It's been fun, hasn't it?
It is. I've got 3 questions, non-related to the others, but I'm going to start with the first one and see where it goes.
Okay.
Why do you think in the 24th chapter of Luke, why do you think that it's at the moment of breaking of bread that Luke situates the opening of the eye of the disciples? Because in my evangelical Baptist background, it would have been like, oh, when Jesus exposed the scriptures, your eyes are open. But Luke actually says that it's when he breaks the bread that their eyes were open. Do you think I'm just asking you, do you think there's a reason why Luke's situated there, or?
Sure, Sam, think about this.
Yeah.
When you break the bread, the very
Mhm.
bread that just 4 or 5 nights ago, whatever it was, when
Yeah.
when Jesus said, "When you do this in my remembrance,"
Mhm.
and he took, blessed, broke, and gave. Right now,
Yes.
um, the text says he's been doing all this atonement theory with them,
Mhm.
but it's all been from the perspective of this victim.
Yeah.
Right?
Yes.
He now helps them to begin to see that even in every ordinary meal, we have opportunity to not just remember who he is, but to remember who we are.
Mm.
We are those that break the bread. And that's why we seek forgiveness in the cup. With me so far?
Yes,
But
yes.
it's in that breaking, it's in that crucifixion of the bread that their eyes are, they all of a sudden they have this bang experience. This is who it is.
Mhm.
Michael,
Speak.
makes me think a lot of how Tom Brown uses the breath of the command breath, the breath of command and breath of surrender is almost like mental triggers.
Mhm.
So, I mean, is it possible that the breaking of the bread was kind of a mental trigger that he had kind of developed to, with his teachings of his disciples, so that it had its
Yes, there's no doubt. I mean, I think I mentioned that because you have it in the feeding of the 5,000 narrative, right?
yeah.
Because you have it in a festal meal in the Passover, and then you have that behavior in just like a regular evening meal on Emmaus, right? So it's not any specific type of meal,
Mhm.
but it's all these meals where Jesus had this ritual. Okay. Now it gets tied into, of course, the Eucharist and becomes the heart of the entire worship service for the early church eventually. But yeah, he would have had that, and it would have triggered them, you
Yeah.
know, I'm sure.
I had a question about, people ask about whether the resurrection happened or not. And I think that's kind of I don't mean to be disparaging to anyone on it, but it seems a childish question in that, like, I don't ask, did the resurrection happen or not? And it's not an issue of whether it did. My question when I read the text is, what does it mean that Jesus has risen?
Mhm.
Because I don't think, when I think of resurrection, like in a very simple way, it's like, oh, okay, Jesus got up out of the grave, he walked out, he's doing his own thing. And that's obviously not exactly what happened.
No.
And I think that's the deeper question for me is, what does it mean that Jesus is risen? And that nobody recognizes him. Everyone's like, and it's, I think that's the bigger question I wrestle with. And I wonder if, I don't know, it feels like it all starts when he starts washing everyone's feet. I don't know exactly why I tie it back to there, but did he wash the feet of all the people that he appeared to?
The text never says he washes anybody's feet.
Oh, it doesn't?
No, not in the resurrection narratives.
No, but when he starts moving the journey to Jerusalem, like, isn't that one of the first things before like the Passion narrative? Doesn't he wash the feet?
Well, in the Johannine Gospel is the foot wash.
Okay, I'm sorry. Crossing Gospels. My bad. Oh,
Cross-
crossed. Okay, got it.
You sinner.
No, I've been listening to too many Gospels lately. There's this guy, David Suchet or something. He's a British guy and he reads these Gospels. So I've listened to all of them over like the last week or so. And it's
Nice.
I agree with Sam. Like, I've never before really gone through a whole gospel because, like, I was in church, and you get like a lesson here, a lesson there, a hunk of the story here, but I've never taken, let's walk through the whole, let's just walk through the whole thing. And I agree. It is a very different journey from like anything you get from like studying it, like in parts.
Yeah.
Mm.
I would also want to say that, the modern hyper empirical approach to history, doesn't do justice to history. And I can say that because if a person lives their everyday life just trusting the goodness of God, they will see miracles all day long. And by miracles, I don't necessarily mean events of power, but for example, to me, birds singing is a miracle in the sense that it's a display of power. It's a display of bird power. It's a beautiful display. I love bird song. Okay. We can learn to see God at work only backwards. We can't see God at work in our present. We can't predict how God is going to work in our future. But what we do have is memory. How did God work in our past? And it's when we begin to look at our past and interpret it and see all those places where could have died, we could have taken the wrong path, we could have done this, we could have done that, but the Father was with us, or we did take those paths, and we can see how the Father got us back on the road again. We can only see God in memory. We can't see God active in the present. Rarely, and we certainly can't predict God's action in the future. We can't do that. There's too many variables, particularly if you have any sort of quantum view of reality or an open theist view of reality or anything else. It's too many variables to predict the future. You can predict the probable futures, and then you can say, if we don't change our ways, this is going to be our, you can predict possible futures, and if we don't change our way, this is going to be the probable future, but you can't say for sure, because look at how fast the historical channel has changed since 2020. Just go back to before COVID. Remember how everything was? Life was copacetic, wasn't it? Everything was moving the way it just always moved, and then bang came COVID, then bang came the war with Russia, then bang came the crypto bloodbath, then bang comes the banking crisis. I mean, we've got so many things happening, bang, 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 and they're changing history right now. That's why I'm saying is there are way too many variables.
When you were finishing on chapter 24, you said something that looks like the resurrection, the divorce of God and vengeance was what made them pacifists. Something today, right?
Yes.
I was wondering, do you think that even if we divorce vengeance from God, I was reading First Thessalonica.
Yeah.
Thessalonian. Anyway, Thessalonian. I was reading First Thessalonian, and I found it interesting because in the way that you showed us to read it, it's probably the earliest letter of Paul, and he's still. I feel like he's still learning. He still has some bearings from Jerusalem's church and everything, but he says something to the extent of, "You trust God who raised Jesus from the dead and will deliver you from the wrath to come." Was there still some vengeance?
Oh yeah,
in the Jerusalem church?
Sure.
It doesn't seem like completely divorced.
No, but look, they had divorced the wrath of God from themselves.
Okay.
Right? Even if they're still going to hold it out there for other people.
Okay, from themselves, because
they
for
were
whatever
able to
reason.
say God is not wrathful toward us.
Okay. And that's why it made them pacific.
Then they can drop their arms. But they can still, in their theology, they won't have made that leap that, hey, God isn't wrathful toward anybody. But Paul makes that leap. The Johannine writer makes that leap, and
so it was a divorce of vengeance with God for them.
I think it was, absolutely, particularly because they understood what shalom meant. And second, Jesus said, don't be afraid.
Yeah.
There is no fear here.
but they could still be thinking like, okay, God is going to take vengeance either for us on other or whatever.
Yeah, they're certainly still thinking that. I went back and looked after the 40 days when they say, okay, Lord, now we're ready to go redeem Israel. And he says, no, you need to wait. You need to wait. You need the same Holy Spirit that I had, and I'm going to give it to you. Just be patient. And it just so happens they're all hanging out there in the temple at Pentecost when bada boom, bada bing, Jesus appears in their midst and passes out the Holy Ghost. Here's a little for you, Sam, and a little for you, Richard, and a little for you, Tommy.
Oh, it's interesting. It's interesting because so they were the first, because we still have those today, but they were the first, like, oh, don't worry, we're not gonna take vengeance of you, but God is gonna get you one day, and it's gonna be there were the Jerusalem church was always a little bit like that. Like most
I suspect so.
okay, I understand.
I think so. Yeah.
You said a very sorry, Linda, go ahead.
I was just going to say, to summarize what I've learned from studying the book of Luke that I didn't know before was I never knew that we had, we always knew we had the synoptic gospels, but I never realized how many differences there were when you actually compare Matthew, Mark, and Luke. There's many differences. Also, I didn't realize how that they sort of took and shared with one another. That was something I didn't recognize. And that Luke had that additional source, which you said might have been the
Hebrew gospel.
Hebrew gospel. And another thing that I learned was that I didn't realize that that the different synoptic writers sort of had different slants. I mean, I sort of knew that, but even as to who was the one that was most at fault in the killing of Jesus and how they, so I just want to say that I know these seem pretty basic, but I learned them and I appreciate it. So thank you.
Yeah, again, Luke's gospel doesn't have Jesus crucified under Pontius Pilate. Because he's pro-Roman, so he's kind of absolves Pilate of all responsibility.
Linda, I'm hoping that I can persuade Michael to do a rumination session where maybe he doesn't need to do any more work, but he picks out one or two things from the gospel, and we, if it's a session like this, we have the chance to say what we've learned, which is exactly what you've done. So maybe that adds a little bit of persuasion for you, Michael.
Well, I was thinking about this morning, Richard. I know we're recording, but it's okay. I was thinking about maybe either this Saturday or a week from Saturday, like at, I don't know, noon, anybody that wants to come on and talk about it and what they learned and we could do that. I was thinking about that would be good, but I've got to make sure it's not on the same week that I podcast, because we've moved our podcast schedule to Saturdays. So, but I think that would be fun. And Saturday, even if it was at 2 p.m. or 3 p.m. would be fine, because everybody could still join us from the UK. So yeah. Will that work, do you think?
Yeah, I think so. Well, I'll do a ring around, as it were, and see who wants to join. Yeah, and that would be good. Yeah. I think, Sam, you had one more question. I've got a couple questions. Just on that last one, Michael, you said that Jesus appeared to them at Pentecost. You think he appeared visibly?
Yes.
And that's therefore where we get the 500 who saw him. I assume the 500 who saw him was in Corinthians was a different occasion, but obviously it could be Pentecost if that was visible. I'd never seen it like that.
Yeah, so
The spirit appears like tongues of fire.
in verse 3, that's your use of hopes theson, here as in the plural, but the singular hopes they. Yeah, it appeared to them as tongues of fire. And it came and rested upon each. But it's that use of that verb hopes they that is only used of these resurrected appearances. There might be another couple of indicators in here on that. I forget, but I'm going in memory, just on memory, on an article I read probably 45 years ago by CFD Mole on this narrative. In fact, I think I might be able to put my finger on it. It's in my library. But anyway,
Yeah, that's great. One to go back to, I thought that was interesting that other myths of a dying and rising God. Now you contrasted this because of the explosion of witnesses. So obviously those other type of dying and rising gods had a sort of esoteric, not many people, he was thought to have died and risen, but kind of nobody particularly saw him.
No, that's correct. That's correct.
So this is completely different, and in a sense, as you say, it's that message that can speak to us, the message that there were so many witnesses, and then the next explosion for us is the fact that they all then laid down their arms.
Yes.
So it's almost like a double-barrel shotgun. We can see the multitude of witnesses, and then we can see that they laid down their arms. We have that benefit of history.
That's the one thing we know they did.
Yeah.
And I think you have to connect that decision with a theological decision. Or a theological paradigm shift, rather.
Sam, did you have well,
Yeah.
I was just going to drop a couple of thoughts in, not requiring comment, that we know that Judas, we call Judas Iscariot, Judas the Knife, but I wondered whether in fact he was known like that at the time, or whether that was a name, an epithet given to him subsequently as being one of the ones who was of the party of force and not the party of pacifism as followed.
Yeah,
I mean,
so then the question is, what's the relationship between the zelotes, the zealots, and a group known as the Sicarii? So a zealot could be anybody that would engage in brigandage, whereas the Sicarii were those that specifically went after Roman soldiers.
Yeah, I was sort of speculating that he may even not have been a Sicarii.
Yeah, he may, but you're right. It may have been an epithet put on him, but I don't know. I'm not. Again, I do have some books on this. Actually, I could go look.
No, it was only a minor point. Another minor point was, of course, I hoped you'd say a little bit more on the ascension, but the ascension is actually reversal of Deus Ex Machina, isn't it? In Deus Ex Machina,
did I miss the ascension? No?
You did.
Did I miss the ascension in Luke? Hang on a second. Oh, if I did, then I must do that. My bad. I'm going by I'm using my synopsis. Oh, so I missed the last few verses. Well, let me do that. Then he led them out as far as Bethany. Who lives in Bethany, guys?
Lazarus.
Lazarus. And lifting up his hands, he blessed them. That's a very priestly act. Lifting up his hands, he blessed them.
Hmm.
When he blessed them, he parted from them and was carried up into heaven. And they returned to Jerusalem with great joy and were continually in the temple. Yeah, so the ascension is important. In fact, the ascension is more important in early Christianity than the resurrection. Because in the ascension, Jesus is given the name above all names. Jesus is given all authority in heaven and on earth. He sits at the right hand of God, the Father. In the early for the early Christians, as I mentioned, Psalm 110:1, the Lord said to my Lord, sit at my right hand till I make your enemies a footstool for your feet. It's the most oft-quoted text in the New Testament than any other ancient biblical Jewish text. And it's almost always with reference to the ascension, even in the epistle to the Hebrews. So the ascension was huge. Jesus sits at the right hand. That's what gives us the authority we have to say to the blind man, silver and gold I have I none, but what I have I give to you. And he heals him. That's some power. And again, why don't modern Christians have any power? Because they carry a sword.
Or
As long as you trust in the power of the sword, you're not trusting in the power of the Father. You can't serve the Father and the sword.
is a gun okay though?
Bang, Sam.
The point I was making about the ascension was that kind of ironic point that not only
Deus ex machina. It's interesting.
yeah, that's
Yeah.
right.
If you ask me, was this bit historical? I'm just going to go meh, and it doesn't really matter to me.
No.
I really don't care.
It's interesting, but the anti-ex machina thing, the Deus ex machina, is interesting. It's God leaving in power instead of God coming in power.
Yes.
No, right.
Interesting. I'm just gonna ask my last question because I've only got 5 minutes left for me. Sorry, I need to leave early. It's I've heard you say at some point that the crucifixion is probably the center. I don't know if it's specifically or how we interpret God exactly, or if it's like even the center of your theology in general or something. Some other people says it's the resurrection that should be the center. It's maybe very subjective. I don't know.
Look, I'm going to follow Paul. We preach Christ crucified. I'm going to follow the writer of the fourth gospel and focus everything around the cross. I'm going to focus the same thing like the writer to the Hebrews does around the cross, like the writer to Mark does around the suffering Son of Man, like Luke does. The emphasis in the New Testament is on, don't you know it's necessary for Messiah to suffer? It starts with the cross. The reason the Christians want a resurrected Jesus is they want an easy Jesus. They want a resurrected Jesus full of power and might and glory, and they don't want to have to go through any suffering to get that. They just want to go straight to all the good stuff, right?
Oh, the other world.
They want their dessert, and they don't want to have to eat their dinner.
Yeah, I understand what you mean. Okay.
Okay. So look, we relate to the risen Jesus. We relate to the risen Christ. We do not relate to the historical Jesus. Okay. Our relationships, whatever it is, however it is with any of us, and it's all going to be different. It's all going to be different. However we relate to Jesus, we relate to the risen Christ. Okay. Who sits at the right hand of the Father, who loves the world, who is using us to change the world.
It's interesting. Thank you. It brings me another question. I don't know if I have time. I'm gonna take the time anyway. In your view on the incarnation, whatever it is, we know Jesus was a typical like first century Jew. Do you think that, I don't know how to ask that question, like Jesus was really focused on maybe like Israel when he was the historical Jesus, but then the risen Jesus appears as like having a different focus almost. Do you think like maybe it's just like theological question, I don't know, but do you think like Jesus changed Like in a sense, now that he's the risen Jesus, like, oh, I thought my mission was just to the Jew, but actually it's to everyone, and I'm gonna tell Paul and everything. Just like,
I don't know how to answer that, Sam. I would say that Jesus' mission was Israel focused. The historical Jesus had an Israel focused mission. That does not mean that he didn't think outside of that, as we can see with the healing of the Syrophoenician woman and other Gentiles.
yes.
And his use of the jubilary text that God's going to go to the Romans, and be okay. I think Jesus did what he did for, either knowing or not knowing, I don't know, or being agnostic about the fact that it would benefit the world. He was just doing the Father's will.
No, exactly. He was trusting God. So
Yeah, and I don't, of course, after he's raised from the dead, okay, so I have some folks that have done the grandfather stuff here with me, right?
I did the first
You
one.
did.
Yeah.
Richard did all two of them. Yeah.
When you die, you go into the light. You end up in the light. There's a tunnel, but you end up in the light. It's not a feeling, but your awareness at that point of the purity of the love that is the divine, just the purity of the love and it changes the way you think. Now, I was on YouTube yesterday, and it happened to send me in my, how the logarithm sends you the things you're kind of interested in. Well, it sent me this I guess some Afghani, a veteran who died and had he went to heaven. So I don't listen to these things usually, but I do sometimes if I want to laugh, right? Except this guy said it the way that I've experienced it and the way that I think it is. And he comes back from that, having died, he comes back, and now he's all about love and not hurting anybody. He becomes a pacifist.
Yeah.
See? That changed him. That's the encounter with divine love. It changes you to let your defenses go. You don't have to be defensive. When people wound you, how do you handle it? They don't know what they're doing. They're possessed. Right?
Yes. It's interesting. I'm just wondering if it happened like to the historical Jesus when he was restored in his glory, in a sense. Who knows?
Well, he's certainly the same figure.
Yeah, for sure, for sure. I'm not saying like it's two different person, like the human and the divine. Just like sometimes when we talk about the historical Jesus and the risen Jesus, sometimes it almost feel like it's two people, but so
Well,
I'm just
in a sense, there is a before and an after to the
yes.
existence of the figure known as Jesus of Nazareth or Jesus the Messiah. There
Mhm.
are two distinct realities, and
And that's probably why the early church like struggles sometimes with the nature because they're almost seems like two. Anyway, I'm sorry I need to go, but thank
all
you
right.
very much
Yeah, you're welcome.
for the gospel. Bye everybody. Sorry
Bye-bye,
about being
Sam.
like that.
There was one more thing you said earlier that you were going to cover, which was the 3 days.
Oh, so why is 3 days so important? Okay. If Jesus had died and then the next day had been raised from the dead, the resurrection would be the natural outcome of the crucifixion. Okay? That you with me so far?
Not entirely.
Okay. The
How would it be natural?
because the dying, rising God. You would expect the God that dies to be the God that rises.
Oh, okay. He dies with the night and rises with the sun.
Right. The 3 days, that interregnum, I think, has to do with showing us that we're not dealing with myth here. We're dealing with something else. Yes, there's going to be a resurrection, but the time in between, which is really where we live, is absolutely essential to the narrative in order to show that, how do I want to say this? If Jesus had died and then the next day was raised, death would be easy. There would be, you know what I'm trying to say? There would be,
You gotta spend some time in the tomb.
what's that? Yeah,
You gotta spend some time in the dirt in the tomb.
yeah, you really do. And for the,
Otherwise, it's like the dead cat bounce.
yeah, it's a dead cat. That's right. That's a dead cat. They're very good. That mythology is a dead cat bounce because the god is really dead, right?
Mhm.
That's a great analogy. Sorry for you cat lovers.
The other thing that struck me on a lighter note was the fact that Luke has the 2 men, and he's the one who was speaking about 2 men only shortly before.
In the tomb.
No, but he talks about them then. But he spoke about 2 men in the previous chapter.
In
The
20,
2 thieves.
in 23.
Yeah, the 2 thieves.
Oh,
So, overheating,
right.
imagination, maybe that was the 2 thieves resurrected.
No, because the one is named Cleopas in the narrative, and
No. The two men by the tomb door, not the evening.
oh, because if those were the same guys, I mean, they're there telling the women, "Hey, Jesus is raised," and then you wouldn't have them walk on the road to Emmaus being all perplexed. That wouldn't make sense.
No. What I'm saying, but it's so trivial that and lighthearted, it's not worth pressing. Was that the 2 thieves on the cross,
Right.
died with Jesus, were raised with Jesus, and they were the 2 men in the morning who appeared in dazzling apparel, saying to the women. So
Okay, so that's a very interesting midrash. I like it. I like it. It's an interesting midrash. Yeah.
Because otherwise, there's only, well, that's right, you got the point. It's just a light-hearted point.
Yeah. An interesting bit of speculation.
Exactly.
All right, guys. Well, thank you for a fun time in the Gospel of Luke. And I think we'll go ahead, Richard, and I'll post something. I've got to just check with my peeps, but even if we did like 2:00, that would still work for our British friends, right?
Yeah.
Okay. So I'll schedule it for 2:00, not this Saturday, whatever date that is, but the following one, whatever date that is, and then we'll gather and think. Hey, peace and love.
Thank you, Michael.
See you later, guys.